Before you close that second cuff, officer, ask dispatch who owns this house. Justice Alana Brooks spoke without raising her voice, but something in her calm made Officer Grant Mercer pause with one hand hovering near the open restraint at her wrist. Rain tapped against the porch roof of the red brick home behind her, soft and steady, while blue lights washed across the quiet lawns of Ashford Heights. Curtains shifted in neighboring windows. A delivery driver stood beside his van across the street, phone lowered but camera still recording. Mercer stared at Alana as though her composure offended him more than any argument could have. "You don't get to give instructions here," he said. Alana held his gaze. She was 52, dressed in a charcoal coat over a simple cream blouse, her silver-streaked curls damp from the morning drizzle. A brass house key rested on the porch near her shoe, where Mercer had ordered her to drop it. The front door stood inches behind her, its dark blue paint worn slightly around the handle from decades of use. Her mother's door, her childhood door, her home. Yet Mercer had arrived already convinced that she did not belong on the other side of it. His younger partner, Officer Ethan Reed, stood near the patrol car holding a tablet against his chest. "Grant," Reed said carefully. "Dispatch is still checking the property record." Mercer did not look back. "We have a possible break-in and an uncooperative suspect. That's all we need right now." "I answered every question you asked," Alana said. "You rejected every answer before I finished giving it." Mercer's jaw tightened. 10 minutes earlier, he had demanded identification. When Alana explained that her wallet was inside, he refused to let her enter. When she offered to unlock the door remotely and show him the deed stored on her phone, he took the phone from her hand and placed it on the hood of his cruiser. When she recited the alarm code, he called it suspicious. Every fact had been treated as another reason not to believe her. Imagine standing at your own front door, holding the key your mother gave you 30 years ago, while someone wearing a badge demands proof that your life belongs to you. Alana knew anger would give Mercer the story he expected, so she gave him precision instead. She stated his name, his badge number, the exact time of the stop, the fact that his body camera was active. Then she looked directly into its small glass lens and said, "For the record, I have not attempted to leave, enter the residence, or interfere with either officer." Mercer stepped closer. "Turn around." She complied, not because he was right, but because truth sometimes needed room to record itself. The first cuff closed with a quiet click. Across the street, the delivery driver lifted his phone higher. Reed looked down at his tablet, then suddenly froze. The radio on Mercer's shoulder crackled. "Unit 12, stand by," the dispatcher said, her tone no longer routine. A pause followed, long enough for the rain to become the loudest sound on the block. Then her voice returned, slower and unmistakably urgent. "Officer Mercer, do not transport the woman. We may have a serious identification issue." Mercer glanced at Alana for the first time without certainty. She turned her head just enough to meet his eyes. "I gave you the chance to verify before you judged," she said. Far down the street, 3 black SUVs rounded the corner, their headlights cutting through the gray morning as they moved steadily toward the house. The 3 black sport utility vehicles had not yet reached the curb when the story returned to 22 minutes earlier, before the radio changed its tone, before Officer Grant Mercer touched the handcuffs, before anyone on Ashford Lane understood what was about to unfold. Justice Alana Brooks had arrived alone in a silver sedan just after 8 in the morning, carrying a small leather bag and a ring of old keys that clicked softly in her hand. The rain was lighter then, more mist than storm, settling across the neighborhood in a thin gray veil. Ashford Heights was the kind of place where lawns were trimmed to the same height, porches were painted before the color had time to fade, and unfamiliar faces were noticed before they reached the sidewalk. Alana had grown up in that house long before the neighborhood became fashionable, long before property values climbed and real estate signs began using words like exclusive and historic. Her mother, Evelyn Brooks, had bought the red brick home after years of working double shifts at a hospital cafeteria and cleaning offices at night. Every room carried a memory. The narrow hallway still held a faint mark where Alana had measured her height as a child. The maple tree near the driveway had been planted on the day she graduated from law school. The brass key in her hand was the same one her mother had given her decades earlier, worn smooth along one edge by years of use. Alana had returned for a single purpose: Inside the bedroom closet was a blue wooden box containing a letter Evelyn had written shortly before her death. Alana planned to read it later that afternoon, before delivering a public address on fairness, citizenship, and the duty of institutions to treat every person with dignity. She stepped onto the porch, inserted the key, and paused when she heard a curtain move across the street. Margaret Whitmore stood behind the front window of a white colonial home, watching with a telephone pressed to her ear. Margaret had lived in the neighborhood for 6 years. She knew the current dog walkers, the regular contractors, and the families who hosted holiday parties. She did not know Alana. That absence of knowledge became certainty far too quickly. "There is a woman trying to get into the Brooks house," Margaret told the emergency operator. The dispatcher asked whether the woman had damaged anything. Margaret said no. The dispatcher asked whether she appeared to have a key. Margaret hesitated, then answered, "She has something in her hand, but it does not look right." Alana entered the alarm code on the keypad beside the door. A green light appeared. The lock released. Across the street, Margaret stepped closer to the glass. "She is going inside now," she said. "I think she may have forced the lock." That was not what she had seen, but fear rarely needed facts once suspicion had given it a direction. The call was upgraded from a request for a welfare check to a possible burglary in progress. Less than 4 minutes later, a patrol car turned onto Ashford Lane. Alana had not yet crossed the threshold. She had stopped to wipe the rain from her shoes, careful not to track mud onto the floor her mother had polished every Saturday morning. Officer Ethan Reed saw a woman standing calmly at an open door. Officer Mercer saw something else. He parked at an angle, stepped out, and immediately placed one hand near his equipment belt. "Move away from the house," he ordered. Alana turned slowly, still holding the key. "Officer, this is my home." Mercer looked at the expensive houses, then back at her, as though the neighborhood itself had already answered the question. "We will determine that," he said. Reed glanced at the address displayed on the patrol computer. The owner's name was beginning to load, but Mercer was already walking toward the porch. Behind Margaret's curtain, a shadow remained perfectly still. Alana raised the key where both officers could see it. "You should verify the property record before this goes any further." Mercer stopped 3 feet from her and gave a thin, humorless smile. People who belong somewhere do not usually need to explain it. Alana studied him for a moment, not with fear, but with the quiet attention of someone listening to a witness reveal more than he intended. Then Reed looked down at the screen, saw the first line of the ownership record appear, and said, "Grant, you need to look at this." Reed held the tablet out, but Mercer did not take it. The screen showed the address, the parcel number, and the name Alana E. Brooks in clear black letters. For one brief second, the answer stood between them, simple and complete. Mercer looked at it, then looked back at Alana, and chose suspicion. "A name on a screen does not prove you are that person," he said. Reed frowned. "The record matches the address, and she has the key." Mercer stepped onto the porch. "Keys can be copied." Alana remained beside the open door, her shoulders relaxed despite the cold mist settling on her coat. "Then compare my identification to the record," she said. "It is inside, on the table near the entryway." Mercer raised one hand. "You are not going inside. You asked for identification, and I am telling you to stay where you are." The contradiction hung in the air, but Mercer acted as though authority had erased it. Alana reached slowly toward her coat pocket. Mercer immediately ordered her to stop. She froze, then explained that her telephone contained a digital copy of her driver license and property documents. He demanded the telephone. She unlocked it, opened the file, and held the screen toward him. Mercer barely glanced at it before taking the device and placing it on the hood of the patrol car. "We will deal with that later." Alana watched him carefully. She had spent years listening to arguments built on weak assumptions, watching people defend conclusions they had reached before the evidence arrived. Mercer was doing the same thing in the rain. Only his courtroom was a porch, and his certainty wore a badge. "Officer Mercer," she said, reading the name on his uniform, "what specific fact gives you reason to believe a burglary occurred?" His eyes narrowed. "You are standing at a house after a suspicious person call. Standing at a house is not a crime. Refusing to cooperate can become one. I have provided the key, the alarm code, the ownership record, and access to my identification. Which part of that is refusal?" Reed shifted his weight. He knew the answer, but he did not say it. Mercer moved closer until only a few feet separated them. You seem very interested in telling me how to do my job. I am interested in understanding the legal basis for what you are doing. That calm response unsettled him. He expected anger. He expected fear. He expected the kind of reaction that could be written later as hostile or unstable. Alana gave him neither. She gave him questions, exact words, and timestamps. Across the street, Margaret Whitmore opened her front door and called out, "Officers, I have never seen her here before." Mercer turned toward her. "You are the caller?" Margaret nodded. "This neighborhood is usually very quiet." Alana looked across the wet street. "You moved here 6 years ago, Mrs. Whitmore. My mother owned this house for 38. Margaret blinked, surprised that Alana knew her name. "That does not mean anything," she said. "It means you mistook unfamiliarity for danger," Alana replied. Reed looked back at the tablet and began reading additional information attached to the property file. Mercer reached over and lowered the screen. "Enough. We are securing the scene." Then he faced Alana again. "Turn around and place your hands where I can see them." She did not move immediately. Instead, she looked at the small red light on his body camera. "Please confirm that your recording device is active." Mercer gave a short laugh. "You do not need to worry about my camera." "I am not worried about it," Alana said. "I am relying on it." The smile left his face. Reed glanced through the open doorway and noticed a framed photograph on the hallway wall. In it, Alana stood beneath a marble arch, one hand raised as she took an oath before a room filled with federal officials. Reed stared at the image, then at her. "Grant," he said quietly, "I think we need to stop." Mercer followed his gaze, saw the photograph, and dismissed it with a shake of his head. People hang all kinds of things on walls. He reached for Alana's telephone again, but the screen lit up before his hand touched it. One name appeared across the display, Daniel Price. Beneath it were 6 missed calls. Alana looked from the telephone to Mercer. "You should answer that," she said. "Why?" "Because he is trying to prevent you from making the most consequential mistake of your career." Mercer looked at the glowing telephone, then turned the screen face down on the hood of the patrol car. "I am not answering calls for you," he said. Alana kept her voice even. "Then return the telephone so I can answer it myself." "That is not happening until we know who you are. You already have the property record, my alarm code, my key, and access to my identification. What I have is a suspicious situation and a person trying to control the investigation." Reed glanced toward the open doorway again. Rainwater gathered along the edge of the porch and fell in steady drops beside his boots. The framed photograph inside remained visible beneath the warm hallway light, but Mercer refused to look at it a second time. Alana understood what was happening. Every piece of evidence that supported her was being treated as unreliable, while every assumption against her was accepted without question. The standard kept moving because the purpose was no longer verification. The purpose was submission. "Officer Mercer," she said, "am I being detained?" He hesitated. "You are not free to leave." "On what legal basis?" "Possible burglary." "What evidence suggests forced entry?" The caller reported suspicious behavior. Did the caller report broken glass, a damaged lock, or an alarm? Mercer stared at her. "You ask too many questions. The Constitution does not place a limit on questions." Reed lowered his eyes, but Alana saw the change in his expression. He was no longer merely uncomfortable. He was listening. Mercer pointed toward the side of the porch. "Stand over there and keep your hands visible." Alana moved exactly where he indicated. She did not rush. She did not argue. She placed both hands at her sides and looked toward the body camera on his chest. "The time is 8:17 in the morning," she said. "I have complied with every instruction. I have not attempted to enter the house since the officers arrived. My identification is available inside and digitally on the telephone Officer Mercer has taken." "Stop narrating," Mercer said. "Why?" "Because I told you to. That is not a legal reason." His face tightened. "You think knowing a few legal phrases makes you untouchable?" Alana answered without hesitation. "No one is untouchable. That is the point of law." Across the street, Margaret Whitmore remained beneath the shelter of her porch, wrapped in a pale raincoat. "She was acting nervous before you arrived," Margaret called. Alana turned her head slightly. "Mrs. Whitmore, you watched me unlock my own door." Margaret folded her arms. "I saw you trying to get inside. With a key. I could not tell from that distance." The distance between the two homes was less than 70 feet. Reed looked from Margaret to the brass key near Alana's shoe. Grant, we should verify the caller's statement before taking this further. Mercer stepped between Reed and the porch. I am handling it. The ownership record is already verified. The identity is not. Reed nodded toward the telephone. Then let her show us the identification. Mercer picked up the device, but did not return it. The screen lit again with another call from Daniel Price. This time, a message appeared beneath the name. We are 8 minutes away. Do not allow local officers to transport you. Mercer read it before the screen dimmed. Who is Daniel Price? He asked. Someone responsible for my security. Mercer gave a quiet, dismissive laugh. Your security? Yes. What are you, some kind of celebrity? Alana looked at him with an expression that carried neither pride nor anger. My occupation is not relevant to whether I own this house. It becomes relevant when you start making claims like that. Then allow me to prove them. Mercer slipped the telephone into an evidence pouch. Not until we reach the station. Reed stared at him. You cannot take her telephone as evidence without establishing a crime. Mercer ignored him and reached for his radio. Dispatch, Unit 12. Begin a transport log for one detained female. Static answered first. Then the dispatcher returned, asking him to hold. Alana watched the red light on his camera and spoke with deliberate clarity. Officer Mercer, are you ordering transport before confirming the property owner's identity? He turned toward her, irritation replacing caution. Turn around. Alana did not resist. She faced the blue door and saw her reflection faintly in its rain-darkened paint. Behind that door sat her mother's letter. Behind her stood a man determined to make certainty out of prejudice. Reed took one step forward. Grant, do not do this. Mercer reached toward the restraints on his belt. At that same moment, the patrol radio crackled again, and the dispatcher's voice returned with a sharpness none of them had heard before. Unit 12, suspend all action. Federal protective personnel are responding to your location. The words federal protective personnel settled over the porch with more weight than the rain. Reed looked toward Mercer, expecting him to stop. Mercer did not. He pressed the radio button and said, Dispatch, clarify. Protective personnel for whom? Static answered, followed by a brief exchange of voices too low to understand. Alana remained facing the blue door, her reflection dim in the wet paint. She could hear Mercer breathing behind her, hear Reed shifting near the steps, hear Margaret whispering to someone across the street. The entire block seemed to be waiting for one man to decide whether evidence mattered more than pride. Mercer reached for Alana's wrist. Until dispatch confirms something useful, this detention continues. Reed stepped closer. Grant, the order was to suspend all action. It was a request for caution, not a command. Those were not the words she used. Mercer turned sharply. Do you want to handle this call? Reed looked at Alana, then at the active body camera. I want us to follow procedure. Mercer faced Alana again. Hands behind your back. She complied slowly. Her voice remained steady. Officer Reed, please note that Officer Mercer has been instructed to suspend action. Reed swallowed. Noted. Please also note that I have provided the property key, the alarm code, the ownership record, and access to identification. Noted. Reed repeated, louder this time. Mercer gave him a warning look. Across the street, the delivery driver had moved closer to the curb. His name was Jamal Turner, and he had been carrying a package toward Margaret's house when the patrol car arrived. Now he held his telephone chest high, recording from nearly 60 feet away. Mercer noticed him. Sir, stop filming and move along. Jamal did not lower the device. I am standing on a public sidewalk. This is an active police matter. Then the camera should help everyone remember it accurately. Alana heard the exchange and closed her eyes for 1 second. Not from fear, from recognition. She knew how often truth depended on whether someone outside the system had chosen to witness it. Mercer returned his attention to her. You have turned this into a spectacle. No, Alana said. Your decisions did that. The first restraint closed around her wrist with a quiet metallic click. Reed's expression changed immediately. Margaret stopped whispering. Even Mercer seemed to hear the finality in the sound. Alana turned her head just enough to see the red light on his camera. Before you close the second cuff, ask dispatch who owns this house. Mercer's hand paused. You still think you are in control. This is not about control. She looked toward Margaret's window. then toward Jamal's telephone, then back to the camera on Mercer's chest. It is about the record. Reed raised the tablet again. The record is complete. Her name matches the property. Her date of birth matches the vehicle registration. There is also a federal security notice attached to the file. Mercer stared at him. What kind of notice? Reed read silently, and the color drained from his face. Restricted identity verification. Contact listed protective detail before detention or transport. Mercer reached for the tablet, but Reed stepped back. For the first time that morning, he refused to surrender the evidence. Alana spoke softly. You are not asking who I am. You decided who I could not be before you ever opened that file. Mercer glanced at the open doorway. The framed oath photograph stood beneath the hallway light, no longer easy to dismiss. In the image, Alana's hand was raised, her expression solemn, while the Chief Justice stood beside her. Mercer looked from the photograph to the woman in front of him. The radio crackled again. Unit 12, stand by. We may have a serious identification issue. A pause followed. Then the dispatcher returned, each word measured and urgent. Do not place the second restraint. Do not transport. Confirm the detained individual as Justice Alana Brooks. Far down Ashford Lane, 3 black sport utility vehicles turned the corner and began moving steadily toward the house. The 3 sport utility vehicles stopped along the curb with quiet precision, their dark doors opening almost at the same moment. Men and women in plain suits stepped into the rain, each wearing a small federal identification badge near the waist. No one shouted. No one rushed. Their calm made the scene feel more serious than noise ever could. Daniel Price emerged from the first vehicle, tall, composed, and carrying a blue folder beneath one arm. His eyes moved from the patrol car to the open front door, then to the restraint around Alana's wrist. For the first time that morning, Officer Grant Mercer looked uncertain. Daniel crossed the wet sidewalk and stopped at the foot of the porch. Remove the restraint from Justice Brooks, he said. The title seemed to change the temperature of the entire street. Margaret Whitmore stepped backward beneath her porch roof. Jamal Turner lowered his telephone only slightly, as if even he needed a moment to understand what he had heard. Officer Ethan Reed looked at Alana, then at the photograph inside the house, and every ignored detail suddenly formed one clear truth. Mercer did not reach for the key. We responded to a possible burglary, he said. She refused to identify herself and interfered with the investigation. Alana turned carefully, one wrist still secured. Officer Reed, is that an accurate account? Reed looked at Mercer. The older officer's warning was visible without a word. Then Reed looked at the red light on his own body camera. No, he said. His voice was quiet, but it did not shake. She provided the property key, the alarm code, the ownership record, and access to digital identification. Officer Mercer declined to complete the verification. Daniel opened the blue folder. Inside were official credentials, a copy of Alana's protective notice, and a document bearing the seal of the Supreme Court of the United States. Justice Alana Brooks is under federal protection, he said. Her identity was available to dispatch before any transport order was requested. Mercer finally removed the restraint. The small click of the lock opening carried across the porch. Alana rubbed neither her wrist nor her pride. She simply extended her hand toward the evidence pouch. My telephone, please. Mercer handed it to Daniel instead. Daniel did not accept it. It belongs to Justice Brooks. Mercer placed the telephone in Alana's palm. The screen showed 11 missed calls. She looked at Daniel. How long have you been trying to reach me? Since your security alert activated when the patrol unit blocked the driveway. Mercer glanced toward the house. Security alert? Daniel nodded toward the doorbell camera, the exterior cameras beneath the roofline, and the discrete sensor above the entry. The property has a protective system. Every minute of this encounter has been preserved. The certainty returned to Mercer's face, but now it was defensive. Then the recording will show that she was argumentative. Alana studied him in silence. Imagine being given one final chance to tell the truth while every camera around you has already recorded it. Mercer had that chance. He chose the story that protected him. She became hostile, he continued. She moved toward the residence after being ordered to stop, and I believed she might flee inside. Reed's eyes widened. That did not happen. You were checking the computer, Mercer replied. You did not see everything. Jamal called from the sidewalk. My recording shows everything from the moment they arrived. Margaret looked toward her front door as though she wanted to disappear behind it. Alana raised one hand, and the street became quiet again. "Officer Mercer," she said, "do not change your statement because of who I am. Complete it exactly as you intended before you knew my position." He stared at her, confused. "Why would you want that?" "Because this cannot become a story about an officer who detained the wrong important person. It must remain a story about what happens when an officer decides that evidence matters less than assumption." Daniel handed the blue folder to read. "Your department chief is on the way." The radio on Mercer's shoulder crackled once more. This time the voice belonged to Chief Rebecca Sloan. "Officer Mercer, step away from the residence and surrender command of the scene to Officer Reed." Mercer looked down at his badge, then toward the cameras that had captured every decision. The power he had carried onto the porch was still pinned to his chest, but it no longer controlled the truth. Chief Rebecca Sloan arrived less than 4 minutes later in an unmarked sedan, stepping into the rain with the controlled urgency of someone who already understood that the damage had moved beyond a single porch. She was in her late 40s, dressed in a navy coat, her expression composed but severe. Mercer stood near the patrol car while Reed remained at the foot of the steps, still holding the blue folder Daniel Price had given him. Alana stood beneath the porch light, her telephone back in her hand, the brass key still resting near the door. Sloan looked first at Alana, then at Daniel, then at Mercer. "Justice Brooks, I am Chief Rebecca Sloan. I apologize for what occurred here." Alana answered calmly. "Chief Sloan, I appreciate your presence, but this should not begin with an apology to me. It should begin with an accurate record." Sloan nodded once. "Agreed." She turned to Mercer. "Your body camera remains active. State your account." Mercer looked toward the watching neighbors, the Federal Protection Team, and Jamal Turner, who was still recording from the sidewalk. The confidence he had carried onto the property was gone, but pride had not left with it. "We responded to a possible burglary. The subject refused to provide identification, challenged lawful instructions, and attempted to enter the residence." Reed lowered his eyes for a moment. Alana did not interrupt. She allowed Mercer to finish. That was the mistake he did not understand. Silence was no longer protecting him. It was preserving every word. Sloan turned to Reed. "Officer Reed, do you confirm that account?" Reed looked at Mercer, then at the open doorway, where the photograph beneath the marble arch remained visible. "No, Chief. Justice Brooks provided multiple forms of verification. Officer Mercer prevented her from retrieving physical identification and declined to review the digital copy on her telephone. She did not attempt to flee or force entry." Mercer shook his head. He was distracted by the property search. Reed met his gaze. "I was present for the entire encounter." Sloan extended her hand. "Give me the tablet." Reed passed it to her. She reviewed the property record, the federal security notice, and the dispatch timestamps. Her expression hardened. The ownership match was available at 8:12. The protective notice appeared at 8:14. The detention continued after both. Mercer spoke quickly. The identity was not confirmed. Daniel opened a secure application on his telephone and held it where Sloan could see. The identity was confirmed through the federal contact channel at 8:16. "Your dispatcher attempted to halt the detention twice." Sloan looked at Mercer. "Why did you continue?" He said nothing. Rain gathered along the brim of his cap and dropped onto his shoulder. Alana stepped forward, not as a judge delivering a ruling, but as a homeowner standing where her mother had once welcomed neighbors inside. "Chief Sloan, may I ask Officer Mercer one question?" Sloan gave a small nod. Alana faced him. "At what point did you consider that I might be telling the truth?" Mercer looked toward the house, then at the key, then at the cameras. His silence lasted too long. Alana understood the answer before he spoke. "I was following instinct," he finally said. "Instinct," she repeated softly. "Not evidence." Margaret Whitmore remained across the street, one hand pressed against her porch rail. She had not expected her telephone call to expose anything about herself. She had expected confirmation. She had expected someone else to be questioned, removed, and forgotten. Instead, the truth had turned back toward everyone who helped create the moment. Sloan removed Mercer's radio and identification card from active duty status, placing both inside a sealed envelope. "Officer Mercer, you are suspended pending formal investigation. You will not complete the incident report. Officer Reed will preserve all digital evidence, and submit a separate statement. Mercer stared at the envelope as though the badge had changed meaning in his hands. Then Sloan looked toward Alana. "Justice Brooks, is there anything else you require at this scene?" Alana glanced at Jamal, at Reed, and finally at Margaret. "Yes," she said. "Preserve the emergency call exactly as it was made. Every word matters, including the words spoken before the officers arrived." Across the street, Margaret's face went pale. The first lie had not been spoken by the man with the badge. It had begun behind a curtain, with a woman who decided that someone she did not recognize could not possibly belong. By noon, the rain had stopped, but the evidence kept arriving. Chief Rebecca Sloan moved the review to a secure conference room at police headquarters, where every recording was synchronized on a single screen. Alana sat beside Daniel Price, not at the head of the table, but among the witnesses. Officer Ethan Reed sat across from them with his written statement open before him. Grant Mercer was not permitted inside. His account had already been preserved, exactly as Alana requested, and now the truth would answer it line by line. The emergency call played first. Margaret Whitmore's voice sounded nervous as she described a woman at the Brooks residence. The dispatcher asked whether she had seen damage to the door. Margaret said no. She was asked whether the woman possessed a key. After a pause, Margaret claimed she could not tell. Then came the sentence that changed the nature of the response. "She looks like she is forcing her way inside." The doorbell recording appeared beside the audio. It showed Alana inserting a key, entering the correct alarm code, and waiting for the lock to release. No damaged door. No forced entry. No hurried movement. Just a homeowner returning to a place filled with memory. Then Mercer's body camera began. He approached before checking the property record. He rejected the key. He refused access to identification. He ignored Reed's warning. He heard dispatch order him to suspend action and continued anyway. Every statement he later made was placed beside the moment it contradicted. He said Alana had tried to flee. The video showed her standing still. He said she had refused identification. The video showed her offering 3 forms of it. He said she had acted aggressively. The recording captured a calm voice asking precise questions while his own tone grew increasingly impatient. Truth did not shout. It simply remained consistent. Sloan leaned back from the screen, her face pale with anger held firmly under control. "This is not a misunderstanding," she said. "No," Alana replied. "It is a sequence of choices." An internal affairs investigator entered carrying a stack of archived complaints. Mercer's name appeared on 7 of them. 5 involved black residents, stopped near homes or vehicles they legally owned. 2 included the same phrases Mercer had used that morning: "did not appear to belong," "refused to cooperate," "behavior raised suspicion." 3 complaints had been closed because no independent video existed. One complainant, a black school principal named Harold Green, had reported being questioned in his own driveway while unloading groceries. Another, a nurse named Tamika Ellis, had been detained outside the townhouse she had rented for 4 years. Mercer's reports described both as confrontational. Their statements described the same moving standard Alana had faced. Proof offered. Proof dismissed. Questions asked. Questions treated as defiance. Reed stared at the files. "I worked beside him for almost 2 years, he said quietly. "I thought he was just strict." Alana looked at him. Systems survive when harmful patterns are given harmless names. Reed lowered his head. "I should have spoken sooner." "You should have," she said, without cruelty. "But speaking now still matters." Sloan ordered every complaint reopened and requested an outside review of Mercer's arrests, stops, and written reports. She also placed the dispatch supervisor's handling of the call under examination, not because the dispatcher had caused the misconduct, but because the department needed to understand how an unverified assumption had escalated so quickly. Daniel closed the blue folder. "There will be national attention once this becomes public." Alana looked through the conference room window at the city beyond the glass. "Then the attention must stay on the pattern, not my title." Sloan studied her. "Most people in your position would demand the strongest possible punishment." "Accountability is not revenge," Alana said. "It is the work required to make sure the next person does not need a federal detail, a doorbell camera, and a public office to be believed." At that moment, an investigator placed one final document on the table. It was Mercer's unfinished incident report, automatically saved before his access was suspended. In it, He had already written that Alana reached toward him in a threatening manner. The timestamp showed he entered the sentence before the restraint was removed. The room fell silent. He had not merely misunderstood what happened. He had begun rewriting it while it was still happening. 3 weeks later, the city released the findings of the independent investigation. Grant Mercer was dismissed from the department after reviewers confirmed that he had ignored verified records, continued a detention after direct instructions to stop, and entered false details into an official report. 7 previous complaints were reopened. 2 cases were referred to the district attorney for further review, and several residents who had once been told that there was not enough evidence were finally invited to give recorded statements. Chief Rebecca Sloan announced new requirements for suspicious person calls involving homes, vehicles, and businesses. Officers would be required to verify ownership records before escalating an encounter when no immediate threat was present. Supervisors would review any report containing phrases such as "did not appear to belong," and every patrol officer would receive updated training on bias, lawful detention, and the difference between nervousness and evidence. Some people called the reforms excessive. Others called them overdue. Alana called them a beginning. Officer Ethan Reed testified during the investigation and accepted responsibility for remaining silent during the first minutes of the encounter. His honesty did not erase his hesitation, but it changed what came after it. He began speaking at training sessions, telling younger officers that loyalty to a partner could never come before loyalty to the truth. Margaret Whitmore submitted a written apology to Alana, but Alana did not respond immediately. Instead, she asked that Margaret attend a neighborhood meeting where residents discussed how assumptions become emergency calls and how emergency calls become official action. Margaret arrived quietly and sat in the back row. When it was her turn to speak, she admitted that she had not seen a crime. She had seen a woman she did not recognize and allowed fear to supply the rest of the story. No one applauded. No one needed to. Accountability was not a performance. It was the uncomfortable act of naming what had happened without hiding behind intention. On a clear Saturday morning, Alana returned to the red brick house alone. The street looked ordinary again. Children rode bicycles along the sidewalk. A lawn mower hummed 2 houses away. Sunlight rested on the blue front door where rain had darkened the paint weeks earlier. She stepped inside and walked to her mother's bedroom. In the closet, behind a row of carefully stored winter coats, she found the small blue wooden box. The letter inside was written in Evelyn Brooks's steady handwriting. Her mother had described the house as more than property. It was proof that dignity could take root in places where others once said it did not belong. Alana read the final sentence twice. Never let another person's prejudice decide the size of your dignity. She carried the letter to the front room and placed it beside the old brass key. Through the window, she saw Jamal Turner delivering a package across the street. He noticed her and raised one hand in greeting. Reed's patrol car passed slowly at the end of the block, but he did not stop. There was no need. The house had never required permission to belong to her. Later that afternoon, Alana stood before a room of law students and spoke about the incident for the first time in public. She did not mention Mercer's humiliation or her own title until the end. She spoke about Harold Green unloading groceries, Tamika Ellis returning from a hospital shift, and every person whose truth had been dismissed because no camera had preserved it. Justice, she told them, cannot depend on how important the victim turns out to be. It must begin before anyone knows the name, the profession, or the connections of the person standing in front of them. That evening, she returned home and left the front door open while sunlight filled the hallway. Mercer had demanded proof that she belonged inside. In the end, the city demanded proof that he still belonged behind the badge. He had carried authority and mistaken it for truth. She had carried truth, and truth had outlasted his authority.